best who ever done it. Keon Clark. Make sure you keep it together. All right, boss.
Arian Keon Clark, born April 16, 1975. Keon Clark was once a promising big man selected in the lottery 13th overall in 1998. He was a 7-foot, athletic, mean-demeanored, intimidating shot blocker that flew through the air on offense and defense, known for his defensive ball swatting prowess on the court. He still holds the record for most block shots in a single game for the Raptors, with 12 he accomplished in 2001. Also on the court, he's been called the fire-breathing dragon for his halftime drinking antics you could smell on his breath, like a second-half weapon used to deter opponents. Keon Clark had the talent, mixed with height and high motor, to dominate the early 2000s, not to mention the athleticism rarely seen in a man of his size that gave him high draft pick opportunity to become a great player. But alcohol abuse and addiction got the best of his career and life and sent him down a tragic hole of dark days and what happened to stories. His interesting career only lasted 6 seasons split between 4 teams, with his best play coming with the Toronto Raptors, whom he helped to the playoffs each of his 2 seasons and averaged career highs with. In the 2002 playoffs, he started all 5 games for the Raptors, posting 13.4 points, 8 rebounds, and 1.6 blocks in 34 minutes per game. But Keon's life outside of that was a dark one. In a court hearing in 2007, Clark admitted to the judge that he's never played an NBA game sober and that he would drink a pint of vodka a day and a mouthful at halftime of NBA games, describing it as unfortunate, and it was, seeing how much God-given talent this guy once had. The darkness began early for Clark, who was raised by his single mother and acted out as a child for attention. He picked up drinking early on because in those times it helped him escape the fact he was living in poverty and him always sticking out like a sore thumb because of his size, mixed with not being as adequate in the classroom as his peers. The harmless tool he used to escape his reality and to make people laugh followed him into adulthood and grew into addiction, which landed him in prison with an 8-year sentence for DUI and weapons offense. He describes his time away as a sabbatical, an education into who he was, and surprisingly, time well spent, and looking back at it, it was. Luckily, his DUIs never led to someone getting hurt, and him going to prison could be the reason it never happened. He's cleaned himself up after his release, but it's still a tragic story when you think of what could have been for the lanky lefty. What happened to Keon Clark? Let's talk about it. It's your boy JC, Stunted Growth. Let's get it, man.
Y'all ready to keep this thing moving?
Keon Clark is from Danville, Illinois, and grew up in the Carver Park housing projects where he was raised by his single mother, his father never around to mold his young son. He describes his youth as a class clown who spent more time cracking jokes than opening books. I made people smile, just maybe not the powers that be, he says. This was his defense mechanism for knowing he wasn't a good student, able to read and write as well as the other kids, so he coped by getting drunk and also high off the weed. What he did have though was he was really tall and athletic, which led to him receiving numerous D1 scholarships, except he couldn't take them because of his grades, leading to the junior college route before playing his final 2 seasons at UNLV. Stunt number 1, Sayonara Senior. Keon Clark, by all accounts, had the talent to be a top 5 pick in the draft. His college career began at Irvine Valley Community College, where he dominated competition at 22 points a game, along with over 3 blocks. He transferred to Dixie Junior College before a scholarship to UNLV opened up, and as a junior, he averaged 14.8 points a game, 4 blocks, and 10 rebounds in 28 minutes. It was this season really that shed light on him as a prospect and why he was sought after leading up to the draft. But his senior season was the one that almost put that stellar year in jeopardy. Keon never gave up the drinking, as he says he used alcohol and smoking weed as a way to comfort whatever hardships he went through. If he had a bad day in class, he'd go back to his room and drink. Coach got on him in practice, bad game, back to the bottle. With no guidance around him, being so far from home, and a mother who couldn't control him anyway, there was no stopping the inevitable train wreck. As a senior, Clark was slated to dominate at UNLV, but after only playing 10 games, he was kicked off the team for off-court issues. Before that, he was suspended the first 11 games of his senior season for taking benefits from a sports agent that flew he and a teammate to Miami during spring break earlier in March of his junior year. He later tested positive for marijuana, which earned him another suspension. Not wanting to wait out the suspension, he left school early in February to prepare for the NBA draft. This made him basically the great unknown of the draft, with high potential as a defender and rim runner, but high risk with all the off-court issues that led to him leaving school early, many believing he was in fact kicked off the team for failing the drug test. Because of this, he slid in the draft from a top 5 pick to 13th overall, which was still great for him with everything he's been through up to that point. The fact he was drafted lottery or even at all was a surprise to most that knew him well. But millions of dollars for a kid in his situation was a gift and a curse. Stunt number 2, underwhelming early play. After slipping in the draft because the top teams just weren't sure of the enigmatic Clark, he landed on the Denver Nuggets to begin his career and had a lot of expectations, being selected that high over Rashard Lewis, who became an NBA All-Star. Every team that worked Clark out raved about his athleticism, size, and bubbly personality that left them all with huge smiles and laughter after interviewing him during the draft process. Guess those high school class clown days came in handy just in time. If nothing else, he could be a great locker room guy and pleasure to have around the team that drafted him. That team was the Orlando Magic, who traded him immediately to the Denver Nuggets, where he made his NBA debut. But Clark struggled getting playing time behind Danny Fortson, Rafe LaFrentz, and Antonio McDyess, as well as small injuries that led to only 28 games played as a rookie, averaging 3 points and 1 block. He played 81 games and started 20 in his second year and almost 10 more minutes a game, but still wasn't the player the team hoped he'd be on either end of the floor. Denver was one of the worst teams in the league, and Clark was improving but at snail's pace, one the Nuggets didn't have time to allow to develop. He was traded after 35 games into his third season to the Toronto Raptors, where he played his best basketball. Stunt number 3, drinking to cope. Lastly, Keon Clark's biggest hindrance to his game came as a result of alcohol abuse he thought at the time was actually helping him cope, as he says, with the rigors of being an NBA player and all that comes with. He says the drinking escalated dealing with all the player egos and self-entitlement, along with the constant attention from the media and fans, as well as family and friends that all tried to take advantage of him. As he sought their help and advice, they simply told him to shut up complaining about a life they would trade theirs for in an instant. They'd say things like, "How could you possibly be unhappy? You have so much money and everyone knows you." Quickly, Keon learned that people around him just didn't understand that money doesn't bring happiness. Instead, it magnifies whoever you really are, because now you can do whatever you want. To cope with feeling alone, he drank more and more, and his game diminished because of it. He bounced from team to team over his career, never spending more than a few years in a situation, a lot like the childhood he once knew, including his friend and worst enemy, the bottle. He went to prison for a DUI while on parole as a felon for an illegal weapon found in his home years earlier and served 4 years on an 8-year sentence. One he credits to saving his life. All in all, addiction is no joke, and certainly not something everyone understands. Instead of saying, hey, just stop, ask the person why and try to help get to the root of their trouble. Keon Clark is lucky. He took the long way figuring it out, but he lived a fortunate life in the process and now can be motivation in so many more ways to someone else in his very shoes. Salute, much respect, but for these reasons, his growth was stunted. It's your boy JC, Stunted Growth, and I'm out.